GM, welcome to another Touchgrass podcast episode. Today we have Josh from Irys. KG, Irys is an interesting one. Like, we worked with these guys as well. We know Gus super well. We've never spoken to Josh though. Josh, super great to have you on the show, man.
GM, I appreciate you. I appreciate you having me.
GM. So Josh, like the first introduction that I had of Irys back in the day was I used to term it as like an Arweave L2. That was like the most easiest understanding that I had. I know you guys have changed the messaging a lot. There's a lot of depth into what there is. I know you're rooted in Arweave. Can we start off with like your roots in Arweave, how Irys came out as a concept? Just talk a little bit about that journey. I think that's
Yeah,
super interesting for our
yeah.
audience.
I mean, Iris now isn't really anything to do with Arweave, but back in early 2021, which is when I started Iris, we were actually called Bundler back then, and we were building an L2 for Arweave. So the big problem there was Arweave is a was a, is and was a relatively unscalable chain, and the ecosystem back then was pretty small. It was maybe five smallish projects. So the goal for us was, how do we make this chain more scalable? How do we make it accessible to everyone by improving the experience of using the chain? And then fundamentally, how do we grow the chain and grow the ecosystem? So yeah, we started building that around April-ish 2021, launched in August time 2021. I was still studying computer science in the UK at the time, which is where I'm from, and I ended up dropping out when we launched. And in the first 2 years, we took our way from about 10,000 transactions a day to about 15 million a day. Onboarded about 300 plus projects. So we were the main way that the protocol scaled. At some point, we were doing 95% of the transaction and data volume on the network. So that was kind of the origin story for how Irys came to be. And now, today we're building our own L1, our own data network, where very totally separate from Arweave, that we started building about a year and a half ago. But and then before Bundler, as I said, I was studying computer science in the UK. A lot of the work that I did from a computer science perspective was working on database internals, so the inside of databases, which there's some analogy between databases and storage networks as well, which is why all of these things kind of coalesced and came together.
Awesome. Like how I want this whole conversation to be is I think a lot of people are underlooking, not kind of paying attention to the data space that's happening. And I personally see this being a trend moving forward where different stacks of the layer are kind of on the same level and the value kind of accrues across the data and the IP layer, which you guys are focusing on. And so my first question is like, what is a data chain? How do you guys describe it? Because I don't think you ever say that we are a data L1. You focus more on the programmability aspect and the whole data chain that you guys have kind of, I think, it's kind of started it as a trend where, on the data layer, like how do you describe it in general?
Yeah, I think we coined the term. So a data chain is just a chain optimized to store data. Is kind of the very high level definition. At a lower level, the idea of a data chain is that traditional blockchain is focused on. So let's say a Solana is focused on how do we execute transactions as quickly as possible. Something like Irys is focused on how can we store as much data as possible for as low cost as possible. So not even comparing it to the Web3 solutions, but comparing it to a lot of the centralized storage solutions. In Web 2, we are orders of magnitude cheaper, and that's kind of one of the core functions of a data chain.
And then Josh, for our audience, like obviously everyone's aware of like how data storage, memory is like super huge in AI and LLMs. Can you talk a little bit about why that's relevant to like crypto dApps and like chains and like how Irys does serve as a memory layer?
Yeah, so data and storage generally is fundamentally used by everything. So whatever application you use, 99.9% of them utilize storage in some way, or some form of cloud storage or something like that in some way, whether it's you're interacting with Google, even if you're interacting with Uniswap, all of these guys interact with storage in some form. But we heavily focus within AI because the data part of the stack, the data part of the AI stack, sorry, is basically one of the three major pillars where there is compute, there's the algorithms, and then there's the data. So a lot of our focus is on how can we store these large data sets, how can we store these high frequency kind of inference results. But when we talk more about memory, that term is used more in the context of something like AI agents, where agents need to, or at least the end goal of an agent is that over time they can self-improve and become more personalized to you. So to use a chatbot as an example, as you speak more and more to your kind of AI chatbot, you'd like them to kind of get to know you, to know how to communicate to you, what kind of things you're interested in, what kind of things you're not interested in. And the fundamental part of that is memory, which is that they need to have this kind of large set of data that they store to say, okay, this is kind of the responses that and the questions we've seen in the past. This is the data we found in the past. How does that contribute to what the answer should be now? And more technically, this is called RAG, where you essentially are like using external information inputted into an inference result. And the application that uses RAG the most that people would know is probably Perplexity, which basically I would describe as ChatGPT plus the context of like real-time Google data. And it essentially just uses RAG. So so kind of to summarize, that's kind of memory within AI, and our focus is about how do we provide very low cost, low latency storage of that kind of memory or that information.
Yeah. Just for context, like me and KG were part of an alpha chat called Rag to Riches. I think that would be like a cool name for Irys Ecosystem.
That is a good one. Is that AI related, or was that just randomly?
It's like random shitters. CAs.
Okay. That actually would be an insane name. I'm gonna do that. Okay.
Yeah. Rag to.
Yeah.
And then Josh, like, so let's sort of go back. Like, obviously there was Filecoin, there was Arweave. Traditionally, we've seen a lot of these decentralized storage protocols or chains come out, but then we've never really seen adoption at that scale. Do you think with AI now, like that is the use case that decentralized storage was waiting for to sort of blow up? I know you guys are like super into that. Like, can you talk to me a little bit about the thesis behind why AI is the main vertical for decentralized storage right now?
Yeah. So there's a couple things to point out there. One is the question of like, why has there been struggling demand in the past? And there are two reasons. And then there's a question of like, why now for AI? So to speak about why actually data chains have failed in the past, there are two reasons. One is that, yes, there hasn't been this big catalyst, something like AI, that kind of drives the spike in demand. But I'd actually say a much more prominent reason is that the product or the tech behind some of the existing data chains just wasn't great. And if the product itself is just difficult to use or it's too expensive, it doesn't matter what market you're in, you will fail. And that's broadly what we've seen, where to give some tangible data points, Arweave is permanent storage. It's very expensive. And when you price out most of the market, then there isn't going to be a ton of demand. On the Filecoin side, Filecoin was actually very cheap. But the issue is that it was so slow and so difficult to use. I think you won't find many people who can actually describe how to use Filecoin concisely. And also just to talk about upload and download, when they launched, it took about over a day to download and over a day to upload. So it was very slow. And even today, after 5 years after launch, it takes about 6 hours to upload, 6 hours to download, which is still very slow.
Yeah, I think, and also like one of the other differences that I noticed is all these previous kind of solutions, they were outsourcing all the nodes and kind of building that bootstrapping that network. And I think Irys is kind of doing it themselves, like with the miners and stuff. And also, like you said, that all these why now. In the past, even just this year, there is so many of these top L1s kind of coming out with their own storage solutions that are, kind of complementing their initial what they're building out, saying it's improving XYZ kind of metric and speed, latency, and all that stuff. How does Irys compare to those kind of solutions? Whereas you're an L1, but they are like this building on top of the L1 solution.
Yeah, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to essentially unbundle the big cloud providers, and they're trying to integrate that within their chain. I would say in some ways we're doing something directionally similar in the sense that we are unbundling the storage and the data part of that stack. But when I look at, let's say, there was Aptos with what is it called, Shelby, which I think is like actually just a bad name. Whereas Sui and Walrus, which I think is a good name. I think Walrus is a good name. And each of them from a product standpoint is very different, but I think the end goal for them is they're trying to unbundle the cloud, and they're trying to essentially build these set of tools. So Sui seems to be more focused on these kind of consumer applications. They're more focused on how do we create this kind of name service, the storage, and other parts as well, which is more consumer focused. Aptos is a little bit unclear. They only announced a couple of days ago, so it's a little bit unclear what they're focused on. I heard that they were launching this many weeks ago, but I don't know exactly what their goals are. They haven't really stated what their goals are. But the focus for Irys is that we want to verticalize the entire data stack on Irys, and we want to make it kind of more capital efficient. It's a very complex way of saying we basically want to have storage, the monetization, maybe the processing of data, all to exist within Irys as an ecosystem and make it very affordable and also very fast. It's basically what I'm saying. And so you go.
No, Josh, like now that you see Sui and Aptos investing a lot into like decentralized storage themselves, does that also open up opportunity for Irys to do BD with other ecosystems where you're like, don't build your own custom solution, just use Irys? Is that also a key focus for your team, or is it just like AI focused right now?
So in some ways, it's the question more, are we going to try and compete with Aptos and Sui?
The question is, like Aptos and Sui have built their own solutions in a way for this, and directionally, if you'd see PMF for those chains with those solutions, you will probably have like other chains want to build out something similar. Is the Irys BD team actively pursuing talking to like in Solana, for instance, or let's say
yeah. So we have relationships even with Aptos, Sui less so, but I would even say we have a relatively strong relationship with Aptos to the point where most of their NFT ecosystem uses Irys, and all of the tooling uses Irys. So yeah, we have those relationships already. Same thing with Solana, where we work very closely with Metaplex and a bunch of social applications that also use non-NFT use cases that use us within the Solana ecosystem. So these relationships already exist. What I will say though is that if you look at the data pie, which is a little bit abstract, but the size of that market, Web3 is probably 0.01% of it, and it's actually not really worth actively going after. And this was one of my criticisms of Walrus, is that because it was like so expensive, it's about 25 times more expensive than S3. It's 100 times more expensive than us, 100 to 1,000 times, depending on how you measure it. And at the end of the day, they were only focused on these like very minimal Web3 use cases, and the end goal there is that no one's really going to end up using Walrus. And this is not me saying it like trying to dig at competitors. I can also give you like the devil's advocate to what I'm saying. But like we look at things a little bit more pragmatically, and we say, okay, AI, which transcends crypto, is by far the biggest market on the planet for us, and we're going to focus on that market because we feel like we can actually solve some really difficult problems that AI companies, not just crypto companies, typical AI companies have.
And like this might be a really abstract question, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Like, do bigger companies that are building their own models, do they have trust issues working with a centralized storage provider where they might be worried about data leaks or them selling data to a competitor, and they just don't want to train data with a centralized party, and that's where they would want to use something like Irys? Is that also a use case, or am I thinking too far ahead?
It depends how you look. It depends where you look at on the data stack. If you look at it from a pure storage standpoint, I would actually say there is actually a relatively large amount of trust put into something like AWS. I think people trust that if you store data on S3, it won't disappear. I think it will be disingenuous for me to say otherwise. What I will say is that using crypto will always be more secure because we depend on math and cryptography. And we've already seen with a lot of these PI leaks, or basically personal information leaks, where people's passwords, usernames get leaked. My rough mental model is all data is actually by default public. If it hasn't been made public already, it will be in the next 5 years. And I think companies are starting to realize that, and crypto does solve that by using cryptography as kind of a base standard. When you look at let's say Scale AI being acquired by Meta, I know for a fact that a lot of companies will now move away from Scale AI, or are moving away, because they don't want to interact with Meta, because they do not trust that Meta is kind of a trustworthy party who should hold your data. So I would generally say that there is a healthy degree of skepticism with some of the larger tech companies, or with with the medium-sized companies, with a lot of the larger tech companies, and there is definitely an incentive to move away from those companies from a security standpoint, especially with AI, because the incentive around AI is how can you hold as much valuable data as possible. And if that is your kind of your moat, and that's becoming ever and ever more of your moat when you're creating models, then you kind of want to be careful with the data that you give to companies, because it's basically impossible for anyone to track whether that data has been stolen or not. It doesn't matter what legal contracts exist. I just promise you that these things are most likely happening in reality. It doesn't matter if it's violating any law or regulation.
Yeah, and I would assume like when Microsoft invested into OpenAI, a big factor of the thought process there was like, hey, OpenAI should use Azure, and it would just boost up like Azure usage. Do you think that's also like a part of it?
So I would probably disagree with that, actually. My guess is that OpenAI gets a very good discount from Azure, probably to the point where Azure is not profitable with the infrastructure that they're providing, would be my guess. I think they've said it publicly. The reason why Microsoft essentially pseudo acquired a part of OpenAI was because they were mega behind in the AI race. Meta was creating AI, even Google was creating a little bit of AI with Gemini. There's OpenAI, there's now X or XAI. But Microsoft hadn't really created anything AI related. So for them, it was kind of a way to catch up with the AI race. You see something similar with Apple, right? It's like Apple has very minimal AI infrastructure within its company. One of the biggest tech companies, but they're super behind in AI. So all they did is they created a partnership with OpenAI. So that seems to be like the two directions that companies take. They either vertically integrate and build it themselves, or they interact with one of these larger companies. And seemingly OpenAI is the winner right now.
Is that something you've thought about? Like, hey, we're just gonna acquire a crypto AI company and have them use Irys?
There aren't that many
now.
interesting crypto AI companies. I think the most interesting ones are probably like way too expensive. I think the crypto AI companies that are most interesting are the decentralized training ones. So the Pluralis of the world, and the Prime Minister. Sorry, huh? Sorry.
Is Hive Mapper also part of that category? Where
Hive Mapper is Deepin. That's like
Would you also consider like Deepin part of?
Oh, Deepin. Deepin is an interesting use case. We definitely wouldn't acquire anyone within Deepin, I think. Well, there's an argument actually, but we're definitely actively like looking for any acquisitions right now. I think it's a good problem to have. Deepin would be interesting because Deepin is like depends on the type of Deepin, but I would say there are two categories. It's either where you are trying to coordinate hardware, or you're actually trying to accumulate data. So Hive Mapper is the one where you're trying to accumulate data. Helium is more around you're trying to like accumulate. You're trying to just coordinate resources. So for something like Hive Mapper, it makes a lot of sense for something like Hive Mapper to use Irys or something like Grass, where you're essentially storing large amounts of data, and you're spending millions and millions of dollars to these large cloud companies to store the data that you're generating.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it just depends on how the value of the data those companies hold, and how can it be used on Irys, licensing it to others. And talking about like data sets and how they are like this part where that differentiate different models. How are you guys thinking about, because as more and more data is stored on Irys, that's how the L1 becomes more valuable. Mm-hmm. How are you kind of thinking about onboarding different people to making Irys like one of the biggest repositories for data, and so that it is preferred, any kind of incentive for them, or how are you guys thinking about adding more and more data onto the chain, and not just for storage, but whereas someone else can come and use that, as you said, decentralized training, that can be one of the biggest use cases, right? So how are you thinking about like using that data and kind of timestamping it to IP, and someone else can become the whole marketplace for it?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. Around bootstrapping the actual data on the network, our view is obviously just build a great product, sell that product to people, get people, who like the product, and that's a flywheel in itself. Having a good product is an incredible flywheel. That's one. Speaking more broadly around like outside of storage, what you can do with the data and things like that, our focus is, step by step, we will gradually expand what can be done on the chain. And we will have some external parties, maybe decentralized training, that can interact with the data. But within the ecosystem, we are very focused on taking a very gradual approach to how we expand. So obviously the L1 itself provides this really high performance data, high performance storage. And then right now, also, you might see an application that we talk about on X called Brick Road, which is run by another founder within our ecosystem, but we help incubate them. And they're focused on the monetization of data. So how can we actually, with the data that exists in Irys, provide this kind of Amazon for data sets where you can buy and sell any data that exists and license it and sell it to the OpenAIs or anyone who's kind of interested in buying data. And the idea there now is Irys is a place where you can store data, store these large data sets. You can compute on them, via these external services to distribute training, because we have very low latency storage. But you can also monetize it, so you can license your data, tokenize it directly on the network, and then sell that to anyone globally in also a compliant fashion. So that's kind of the low level, but the high level is over time we start with kind of storage, we start with the monetization and the IP side, and then we'll expand to these other parts of the data stack. Maybe it's labeling, annotation, etc.
Yeah, Josh, I'll tell you a very funny story, like from an Indian standpoint, like everything you just said. Probably not as compliant because they got in trouble. There's like this school in India that like 4 or 5 years ago when AI labeling was not as cool and not as like at scale. So imagine like a school with 1,000 students, and they basically increased like computer lab time for each student by 3 hours each week. And what they would have them do is like just label pictures, and they would just sell that data to like some trading model in the States. They eventually got caught. But yeah, that's like a super favorable.
That's a pretty good Ponzi. I should we should do the same. I'm trying to think what the equivalent is. We should get some like no, I can't even joke about this. This is not a this is not something like I want to be clipped and then sent to me. I never want to have that sent to me. But I may or may not take some notes out of that playbook.
Yeah, you write me a grant and I start up a school in India.
What's that meme? AI is actually Indian or something?
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah. But yeah, man, Josh, like, talk to me about this side of the world. I know, I think you and Gus haven't been to India, but you guys spent time in Asia. You guys lived in Korea. How was that?
He's just bull posting Asia on timeline.
Yeah, so I've traveled a lot this year. I spent a lot of time obviously I've been at my home in London. I spent time in New York, Dubai, and I spent a lot of time in Asia. I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong, and then in Megara, like I spent 2 months personally in Korea, and some of the team was there as well. And yeah, I mean, I'm mega bullish on Asia. I'm actually like kind of bearish on the West generally as well. But within crypto, I think Asia is just one of the biggest markets in general. So a lot of our focus has been on, how can we build community within Asia. I think a lot of the work we do within the West is more around BD ecosystem, like actually getting demand for the product. And then Eastern Asia is more focused on how can we kind of really build community, because there's not a lot of community work to really do in the Western regions. And I think Korea is one of the number one countries on the planet for crypto by almost every metric. And I will give a little bit of alpha to the world, which is that if you like go on a train in Seoul, which is the capital of Korea, you will see, middle-aged women trading crypto on Upbit, which is like not something like, even I think in any other country in the world that's not true. Maybe China. I think broadly in any other country that is not true. Like there is a level of distribution with crypto that exists within Korea that does not exist in any other country on the planet. So that's kind of like one of the interesting things about Korea. But overall, I just think Korea is an interesting place. There are also some interesting projects being built there. So, and I also just personally have friends there as well. So I spent some time in Korea. But I also spend a bunch of time in other places as well. So we're not just focused on Korea. It's Hong Kong. Spend time in Singapore. I'll spend some time maybe in China. So yeah, but overall, Asia is king, in my view.
Yeah, we had Morbid on a few months ago, and he was talking about the Korean granny thesis. I think that's exactly
the Korea granny thesis. I know what he's talking about, but that is an interesting way to frame it. Okay.
Yeah. Is the messaging different in the East, where the focus is more community?
I think the messaging is very different. Like we like to talk about products. We like to talk about people using Irys, and we do that globally. And maybe there are certain things which resonate with different countries, and some countries care about the decentralization component more. Some people just care about the product and the usage more. And we kind of like it's like a scale where each of these things is kind of a lever that we pull up and down. But at the end of the day, the message is the same. We're not telling a drastically different story in every kind of region. It's just how you distribute the message is a little bit different, as you'd expect.
Yeah, and it definitely seems to be working. Like, even though I'm not fully in tuned, I always see these community folks, post really, really cool stuff about Irys. I've seen someone paste some stickers and go distribute in their colleges, and like so many, like it's a different activation. It seems like you're on ground doing all this stuff, but it's not true. It's like totally organic. That's really cool. Uh, One of the question I had, I think, the point where you said all data is public, uh, how important, like I think you mentioned in other podcasts where there are so many services that are better equipped when they're on chain. So when these different services in web 2, not crypto stuff, they come on chain, how important is the privacy aspect of it? How important are privacy primitives? And are you thinking about in general, like are you building the privacy layer kind of stuff, or how are you thinking about privacy in general? Because uh, it's been kind of a very big thing as you're operating in the data landscape.
Yeah. So at least within the data landscape, crypto is a bit of a broader question, but within the data landscape, I think privacy is crucial. And the way to look at it is that data is not just a static thing anymore that you just store and retrieve. It's actually an asset class. Because when AI launched, when ChatGPT launched, let's say, when GPT-4 came, everyone started basically accumulating all of the data on the planet, and that became the moat. So there was this kind of when it's kind of like when the USD becomes less valuable, everyone starts buying gold or Bitcoin or whatever. With when GPT-4 launched, everyone was trying to buy as much data as possible. It was the same thing, and the asset class has just grown exponentially. So when we think about privacy, it's important to, if you own some data, if it's your data that you've created, it's your platform, if it's a user on a user level, it's kind of your actual personal data, then you want to be able to keep that private, and you want to provide a guarantee around that. And when I talk about, within Web 2, everything is by default public, it's that right now the privacy is essentially built on kind of architectural designs and firewalls and things like that, but all of these have been kind of broken. And we saw recently there was some like 10 billion username and passwords leaked from some of the biggest tech companies in the world. So with crypto, you have the ability to use actual cryptography to secure data and make it actually private and make it impossible to read. So even if these stuff did get leaked, it's a bunch of rubbish. It's a bunch of nothing. So in my view, crypto is the end game solution for privacy. As much of it's an end game solution for pretty much everything, in my view.
So with like data being oil, Irys is like the beta for like buying data. That's pretty much it.
Sure, data is oil is a slightly actually crude analogy. Crude
No?
oil.
Okay.
That wasn't even an intentional pun, but we got that. But yeah, when I look at data as an asset class, I am interested in how does Irys capture as much of that as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it just value of Iris and whatever the token accrues is just based on how much data is being kind of stored on Iris and how much kind of being used in different ways. So it's kind of very kind of proportional to that, I guess. Another thing, like we wanted to really dive in, besides the tech aspect, we talked about a lot of parts of Iris. Is also the brand of Iris is very unique, and we've kind of seen this. I think you have done a rebrand once as well, so the kind of shifted a lot. So talk to me about your brand philosophy for something like a data storage protocol, and how do you think about it? Because a lot of these other products, the how it's perceived and the response is kind of very different from Iris. So what's been your brand philosophy, and not just from a like user perspective, but just from scratch, how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, I think Josh, maybe start by like, how did you come up with the name Iris? Um, like that's probably a good story to start with.
Yeah, so Iris came from the word iris, the eye, iris, and it came from this idea that it's a little bit totalitarian, but it came from the idea that because we came from the world of permanent data, although the chain itself does non-permanent data too, we were interested in this idea that our end vision for Iris is that all data is stored on Iris. And in some ways, Iris as a protocol becomes this kind of witness for all of the data that exists. And data is kind of a proxy in some way for human history. So all of this data, all of this history, all of this context will exist on Iris as a protocol, and it will have this kind of view of history. Now, some people would say it sounds a little authoritarian, but or Big Brother-esque. But the reality is that some of that data is private, some of it's public. But the idea is there that we want Iris as a protocol to engulf all of the data that exists on the planet. But to speak more about the brand, I think people generally under-index on brand. I think a brand creates a first impression. This is more just a business thing at this point. It's that brand builds confidence. If you have a really good brand, you will at least subconsciously think, okay, this company, this team is a little bit serious. They are actually a little bit competent. And that's kind of the confidence you want to build in every part of the audience, right? Whether you want to use the product, whether you are holding the token, whether you are a validator on the network, we want you to have confidence in the team, and brand is just one kind of component of that kind of confidence building that you can bring. And we want Iris as a brand and a company to evoke emotion. And yes, Iris can be, it doesn't matter how boring or uninteresting the product is to the average retail person or the average non-developer, because like developers find us interesting, but to non-developers, it doesn't matter how like uninteresting it is, the brand can still evoke emotion. It can still create this feeling. And that's kind of what we wanted to do with our brand.
Yeah, I think some of the product marketing that you guys do, like there was a video of the Iris mascot throwing a baseball, and then like half the screen after, like it just goes faster, like your data is faster on Iris. Like I constantly send that to my team, like, hey, like we should be doing more stuff like this. Like hats off to you guys for doing more of that stuff. I think it also gives the community something to be proud about. Like if you start talking about something that's not really cool on crypto Twitter, like there's little incentive to, because you get mocked by your friends. If something has a cool brand, like okay, so here's my thesis as well. Like a lot of people's buy price on Hyperliquid is actually 35 plus, and they've just started talking about Hyperliquid now, just because it's cool. Like KG's been a holder since like what, KG 8, 6, something. Like I've been in like the mid tens, but like I don't want to take a shot. Like Blockworks has just started talking about Hyperliquid now just because it's cool. So if I guess like if you get to a point where crypto Twitter perceives you as cool, you get a lot more people talking about yourselves, and I think Iris will definitely is there or will get there in the short term. Um, Josh, talk to me a little bit about the things that are being built on top of Iris and what excites you the most. Like, what are like, give some product shout outs. We'll clip it out. We'll individually tag them. Talk to me about the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, most randomly, Trump uses us to store his NFTs. That is most importantly. So it's Iris is U.S. government approved, but I probably shouldn't say that. But nonetheless, I think what we're most interested by right now is the team that we're obviously incubating. Is a little bit selfish, but Brick Road. They're essentially building a data marketplace on Irys, which allows you to buy and sell data. But the reason I'm so excited by what they're building is that it transcends crypto. The need to accrue valuable data to train really high quality models is something that's going to be needed now and basically forever. And you need a really easy way to discover really high quality data. And that's the problem that pretty much only crypto can solve, in my view, because we can create this permissionless marketplace. We can use this really low cost storage that only crypto can provide, which allows for a marketplace to really operate at scale. So I think Brick Road is definitely an application that I probably the one that I'm most excited by, because it's going to bring in Web 2, it's going to bring in Web 3, it's going to be kind of a massive platform for us. Within another interesting one that recently started using Irys is a company called SciHub, which is actually also kind of a non-Web3 application with about 5 million MAU, and it's essentially a massive repository of science papers. And the reason it has 5 million MAU is that it's used by like a bunch of Chinese students in China. And I think it's a way to like circumvent the fact that they can't get access to a lot of the information via the firewall. So it's this very popular site, and they've essentially stored all of that data now using Irys. So when people access their website, they're actually accessing data from Irys. And the cool thing there is that that's actually more of a use case around the censorship resistance. And I think that's a little bit rarer. Most of the use cases are either cost, their performance, they're for these other value props. But SciHub is more focused on actually how do we make the data more censorship resistant. It's more of a regulatory arbitrage play. And that's kind of one of the more interesting use cases. And as I said, we also have Trump storing his NFTs using us. So yeah, all kinds of different use cases.
Is the censorship aspect, like when you were spending time in Hong Kong, was that something you talked about to the crypto community there? Were they excited about it?
I don't think that message. By the way, I actually think the message of censorship resistance for data doesn't resonate greatly with anyone anymore. Just because it's a very old message, and to be honest, it also like doesn't really pertain to adoption either. Like that's not going to be the reason you get adoption. It's going to be the reason. Like SciHub is kind of an exception to the rule, but the rule is generally that people don't care about that. They care more about the performance. The benefits of being decentralized is not just censorship resistance. It's lower cost. It's all of these other kind of features. So when we speak in Hong Kong, it's not so or China more broadly, we're not so focused on the censorship side. But to play devil's advocate there, like there is definitely more interest in that message in China than there is in the US. Because the US, there is no censorship really. Obviously, that's debatable, but there's not any censorship relative to what you see perhaps in China, right? So
yeah. Is there anything that you'd like the ecosystem to build out? Like maybe not an RFP, but like, hey, I'd love someone to just come on Irys and build this. If you're listening to Rushgrass, come build this. Ratchet, I'll give you a grant, build this.
So something that we're considering building ourselves, unless someone comes and dives in to do this now, is building our own kind of S3 API. S3. So S3 people think is as like an AWS product. S3 is actually an API, so you can like implement S3 API on a non-S3 product, if that makes sense. So we're going to be implementing that, and that will reduce the cost of migrating to Irys, which will be really beneficial for growing demand. So that's kind of one of the big focuses. We're really interested in people building databases on top of Irys. So Irys is kind of unstructured storage. Having a really structured database on top is really interesting for us. So we would also greatly support there. And then maybe the labeling and annotation part of the AI stack as well is also another interesting thing that we want to see a protocol built on top of Irys. So to have maybe Ratchet with his school of Indian children doing labeling on Irys. This is what we need.
And then Josh, just to clarify, in terms of like database built on top of Irys, do you mean like an SQL equivalent for Irys where you
maybe SQL or there are other ones, there's like DuckDB. There are a bunch of like different types of databases, but we want to have these databases be able to interface with Irys to ease as a storage layer. Because the way that databases work today is they're actually kind of separated in terms of storage and then compute. So if you've heard of DuckDB and these other databases, that's kind of the compute side. The storage side is really just like, just store blobs of data. So we want a ways for like databases to be able to interface with Irys so that we can kind of tap into the database market.
Call it
I think
Retina. That's a name right there for the storage aspect for sure. No, call it Retina, like Irys, Retina.
Yeah.
I see someone doing that. Yeah, KG, go first.
Yeah. I was just saying, like, another thing like I'm really curious about and diving into personally is like we have seen like all these crypto protocols scraping data publicly, and I think the next wave is probably going to be like the private data sets that are going to be created, whereas users just deposit data, and I don't know, like crypto can, like, all these reward mechanics can kind of incentivize that growth. I feel I think that'd be really cool for someone to just say, here's some money, just give your data and you can license that and store on Irys. I think that's where all these big companies are also doing, right? Like all these acquisitions with, big, I mean, we probably will see some deals with Disney and all these big stars where you have all this images, videos. I mean, that's how all these Google is kind of like way ahead with its VO3, with its video is so good compared to others because they have all this data set. How do you like think about private data enabling some of these models in general? Like, are we there yet?
Yeah, in terms of, are we there yet in terms of what, sorry?
Like big like these acquisitions making to acquire private data sets and incentivizing people, because I think that's one of the things where it things like I'm like I don't want to shout any project personally, but it's a like easy way for someone to say I can give you my data, because if something they're not really using and it's just photos and they're already like posting on Instagram and stuff, if I just give it to some model and get some rewards, that's an
Yeah. There are a couple projects doing this, right? There's Grass is like adjacent to this, Cled is adjacent to this. All of these different projects doing like something adjacent to this. Yeah, we want to see these kind of built on top of Irys in some way. I think that this makes a ton of sense. Fundamentally, we're the cheapest way to store a lot of this data, and then also this will start to plug into the actual. It will plug into the actual marketplace as well. So you start to see how all of these things tie together, where yes, you can store your data on Irys because it's because Irys is a good product, but then you can also start to monetize that data as well. And that's kind of the pitch to some of these Web2 companies, is that sometimes we say we're not telling them store your data on Irys. We're actually telling them, look, you have this data, you're doing nothing with your data. Why don't we monetize that, store that on Irys and monetize it, and we'll make money for you. And so we are already starting to see that more within Web2, but also on the Web3 side, there are obviously a lot of companies doing something similar to that, like Grass, like Cloud. I don't know if there are any other ones that I know of, but those are the top two that come to my mind.
Is KYC, like, have you spoken to any KYC companies?
Why? What's the thought there?
So Coinbase had a breach recently where a lot of customer data was leaked. I would assume that's not done by Coinbase directly, but through a third-party KYC company. Like, have you spoken to any companies that are doing KYC for other?
Yeah, so that's actually more downstream of, we need a database protocol built on top of us for that to work, because at the end of the day, it's more of a database breach. I don't know exactly what happened, but there are really only like 3 or 4 things that can basically lead to a leak like that. And it's almost definitely some kind of like security leak to someone unauthorized got access to a database. So the solution would be some kind of encrypted database, would be like the crypto solution. Right now, we don't have that because we can do encrypted like raw data on Irys. We can't do encrypted like data, like structured database data. So that's kind of why we're interested in databases.
Got it. That makes sense. I know we talked about like, sorry to just change 360, but okay. I know we talked about like Walrus and Shelby. What do you think of the Eigencloud thesis and the stuff that Eigencloud is doing? Is that like competitor adjacent or something you guys have looked into, thought about?
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is like everyone is competitive with everyone to a degree within crypto. Like you can argue that Chainlink is kind of competitive with absolutely everything, including L1s. You can make those arguments, and Eigencloud kind of directionally the same, but I wouldn't say they're directly competitive. Like I would argue like Shelby and Walrus are directly competitive. I would not argue that that Eigencloud is, but they are kind of the same thesis that we feel like there should be some unbundling of the cloud kind of overlords, and how AWS, GCP, etc. operate is not going to be true in 5 or 10 years, and that's kind of the bet that all of us are making to some degree, and we're trying to capture different parts of the value chain. Eigencloud is more focused on how do we utilize like the stake on the network to provide that security, whereas we're more focused on how do we actually unbundle the specific products and verticalize that within an L1.
Awesome. I think we're coming up on time. So we usually ask this question and clip it out and put it in front. What's your like number one advice to any builder in the decentralized storage space, and also thinking about AI and data in the intersection of those, as well as AI and IP and data? Like, what's your number one advice for anyone building in that kind of space?
Don't build a storage network. It's very complex. That would be, maybe that's number one. I think the main piece of advice is most people in the space are not product focused enough, and they do not think about the end user in any way whatsoever. I won't name specific names. You can probably I kind of mentioned bits of this throughout this kind of hour or so. But I would say focus on an end product and have an end use case in mind, because every use case there are like 3 or 4 things on a scale that you can kind of lever up and down, and the solution you build will depend on where you're trying to fit within that scale. So that's kind of like the big bit of feedback. And whether you're building within, let's say, if you're focused on IP, that might be like, are you focused on like user owned data, or are you focused on like businesses and data sets? So those are 2 very different things. The solution you build is very different. Or if you're building within storage, are you building for archival? Are you building for really hot? Are you building for like a specific use case where it's like an AI decentralized? Like I don't know, it depends, right? But you need to. I think that's the main thing that I've seen, is that there is no clear North Star for the customer that you're trying to serve.
Awesome. One final question for our users: what should our listeners, sorry, what should they do right now on Irys? What can they go and, is it on testnet? What do you guys? Where should we kind of direct them to?
Yeah. So for anyone within the developer community want to start building, then go to our docs, go to our Discord, message me on Telegram, Twitter, whatever. Josh_Benaron, my full name. It's the same on everything, including Discord. So you can reach out there. Also, same for non-developers. You can reach out too. But for non-developers, there's also our community portal, which is on our website, or portal.irys.xyz, which has everything that you can do. Whether it's you want to do questing, whether you want to look at our ecosystem, read our docs, whatever you want to do. But the portal is kind of the central repository for all of these kind of community activities. So I would recommend going there.
Yeah, that site looked really pretty. So thank you so much, Josh. It was really great talking to you, and excited to see mainnet and what you guys do next.
Awesome, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Bye, guys.